Welcome to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast.
If you're the one picking up the slack for everybody, staying overtime, doing everything for everybody, and you're starting to feel really drained and depleted, you may have the premature coping style, and it's time for you to be nourished. So once you start to understand the motivation of other people's behavior, it also causes really great team building. You're much easier to manage others and be managed by others when you understand what makes them tick and how you can support them in being a little less in their coping styles and a little more in the antidotes.
That's Dr. Sam Rader. She spent almost 2 decades working as a psychologist before founding Source Code, where she helps people identify and rewrite the deeply ingrained patterns that hold them back. And today, she's here to discuss some powerful wisdom from her practice and forthcoming book called Source Code. Specifically, you'll learn 1, the surprising origins of many work dysfunctions, 2, the 12 coping styles and their antidotes, and 3, how to build your patience for annoying coworkers. Special listener note on this one, we're doing something kind of different here. You might have noticed the super record long episode time. The story here is we're going to dig into something that's new and evolving and pretty different and potentially quite powerful. So this episode actually has 3 parts. The first is a typical interview. The second is me going through a coding session, which is what Dr. Sam does for clients in order to clearly demonstrate what is this stuff we're talking about, the intervention that she works through. And the third is our follow-up conversation that happened sometime after the coding session to see if anything was different, what sort of results came out of that for me. So this is one mega episode with 3 separate recorded conversations separated by some weeks between. And heads up, this episode is by far the most potentially, I don't know what you want to call it, woo-woo, out there, crystally that we've ever done by far. And maybe that we'll ever do. And so feedback is appreciated. Pete@awesomeatyourjob.com. This one's kind of different. We are talking about some things like quantum healing and fractals, and that might feel kind of off for you. And frankly, it felt kind of weird to me a bit as I was hearing it and chatting about it. And that makes sense because it's outside the normal bounds of things I discuss, and thus you might call it weird by definition. But at How to Be Awesome at Your Job, we are all about exploring fresh perspectives for sharpening the universal skills required to flourish at work. So I found value in these conversations and frankly wouldn't publish it if I didn't. So I'd encourage you to keep an open mind to hear a fresh perspective. And if you just, I literally can't even, abide this kind of talk and maybe feel disappointed because you said, oh, Pete, I wanted to hear about these 12 patterns holding me back. Promise in the title. Well, then I would point you over to episode 767, How to Build Tremendous Mental Strength with Amy Morin, which also covers patterns holding us back from a more traditionally psychological perspective. So, with all that said, let's get into it. Now, here is Dr. Sam. Dr. Sam, welcome.
Hi, Pete. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, I'm happy to be here as well. Maui sang your praises so strongly. I was like, well, I've got to hear what all this is about. So let's jump right in and tell us, what is source code in your parlance and lingo?
Sure. So source code is a new technique and theory that I've developed over the last 13 years. I was a psychologist for 18 years, and during that time, I started seeing all these patterns in all of my clients across everyone, no matter their walk of life, where they're from, who they are. They all seem to have the same 12 problems. And once I saw these patterns, I started working with those instead of any other old ways of diagnosing things. I just saw them as these patterns. And over time, I found that the ways to heal them are quicker when we bypass the mind and just work with the patterns themselves as sort of symbolic energies. And I can speak more about that later. But as we've done this, I've developed this new way of healing. It's an alternative to coaching and therapy, and I call it source code. And source code is based on the premise that in our first 5 years of life, our early experience writes a code deep within us. And that coding kind of becomes the algorithm that runs our matrix of reality for as long as we live. So we keep reliving the same patterns and problems that we had from our family system when we were little, keep attracting and reenacting it, and we're not even aware of it. It's kind of like living in an invisible prison. And what I do is I help people jailbreak we kind of liberate ourselves from these lifelong unconscious patterns so that we can finally feel truly free and feel more connected to our essence of love and joy and peace.
Oh boy, intriguing stuff. Okay, so more love, joy, peace. Sounds great. I mean, I think we could all sign up for that, but I got to be true to the ethos of the show. But Sam, how's that going to make me more awesome at my job?
I know, that's so good. It's such a good one. Well, so source code is based on the premise that we live in a fractal universe. And let me explain what I mean by that. Fractals are, probably your audience has seen 3D renderings of them online. They look kind of trippy and psychedelic and beautiful, but it's really a mathematical equation representing how there's a pattern that repeats at scale. So when you look at a fractal image, it's got a certain amount of squigglies and doodly dots. And if you were to zoom all the way in microscopically, it's that same exact pattern. Zoom all the way out, same pattern, all the way to the left, all the way to the right. It's the same exact pattern that keeps repeating. So when we're encoded in our first 5 years of life with these patterns, these what I call our coping styles or the glitches in our matrix, they keep repeating at scale in every area of our lives, including our work life. So if we're always a pushover because we had a parent that was highly dominating, we're going to attract best friends who dominate us. We're going to attract lovers who dominate us. We're also going to attract bosses at work who dominate us. And we're going to keep doing that pushover people pleaser thing and feel like we can never say no and never hold a boundary. This is just one of the 12 potential glitches that I'm outlining now. And it deeply affects our work life. It deeply affects our finances, how we show up at work, the circumstances we attract at work, what we're capable of, and the money we're able to make is all determined by our coping styles.
Intriguing. So that in essence, it sounds like I could have one or maybe multiple. What's your take?
We all have several of the coping styles because none of our parents were able to get it right so many times because they were working with their own coping styles. So I personally had all 12, which is what allowed me to be the conduit for the work. Most people have like a dominant, maybe 5 or 8 of them. But yeah, we all have a combination of them. And another cool thing about the fractal is like that whole thing as within, so without, that let's say you're a business owner. If you have a certain holding pattern in your energetic system that repeats in your life, your business is going to be an exact reflection of that same holding pattern inside of you. So when I do coding work with CEOs and business leaders, when we code out all the glitches inside of them, lo and behold, all their clients start acting differently. Their employees start acting differently. The money starts flowing. The whole organization feels completely different because the organization is just an extension of them. So whatever we're embodying, whatever patterns we have, those patterns are going to show up exactly reflected in our work and in our businesses.
Could you give us a cool example of someone who identified one of these patterns, took some actions, and then saw some cool transformation unfold in their career life?
Absolutely. Yeah. I was recently working with this CEO and founder of a consumer product company. And what we discovered was that his core wound was what I call the withstanding subtype of the frustrated coping style. So let me break that down for you. When we're little, around 10 months of age to 4 years old, we're developing our will. We're developing our sense of what we can and can't control with our will. If we are overly frustrated during that time and our will doesn't get to matter, we won't be heard, things are really hard around us, we become frustrated. We develop the frustrated coping style and it haunts us through life. But there's 4 subtypes to frustrated. And the one this man was working with is called withstanding. Withstanding is when we grew up in a family that was kind of extremely harsh. Things were really hard. Maybe we were abused literally or emotionally. It was like high neglect or high abuse, just like really painful stuff, right? And so what we do on the inside to cope with that is that we become withstanding, resilient, durable, unbreakable, unbeatable. I'm going to be so firm that none of that pummeling from the outside is going to break me or destroy me. Right. And so for this client, as we started processing it for him, he said he identified with the man of steel, like Superman, right? Who can withstand anything. But the thing is, when you're in the man of steel embodiment, because you've had to withstand so much abuse from the outside. That man of steel embodiment is paired together with a villain on the outside. There's no superhero without a villain. He'd just be Clark Kent otherwise, right? So what would happen in this man's business is he'd be going along thinking he was doing the right thing. And then all of a sudden, the other businesses he was doing deals with, they would do these sinister, villainous, damaging things to him. And he would have to be that resilient, durable, withstanding man of steel, because that's the fractal pattern he was living inside of. So he kept attracting and reenacting these circumstances where he'd be beat down and disappointed and the rug pulled out and pummeled, and he'd have to just keep withstanding it. So once we were able to do the work and soften all that need to withstand and realize that there can be an entirely new reality beyond the harsh, beyond the hard, where things actually get to be easy, which is the antidote to withstanding. Each coping style has a corresponding antidote. When things get to be easy, all of a sudden the business starts taking off in a more effortless way. And business partners and associates are coming in with kindness, fairness, gentleness, collaboration, playfulness, warmth, instead of that pummeling from the outside that was so familiar. So we were able to switch the story he was living in and recode his matrix so that now he's living in a world that's easy and in flow instead of hard and challenging.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I dig that story. And it was funny, as you were talking, I was thinking a little bit about, David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me, in terms of that's very much the story. We had some abuse, and then he became the hardest mother effer alive, is kind of his tagline. And I don't know the particulars as to his business partners or what's gone down there. But yeah, I could sort of see how, indeed, certain experiences could form us to cope, kind of a coping style in a certain way. I guess what I'm wrestling with a little bit is, talk to me about this word attracting in terms of what is the pathway or mechanism by which that unfolds in reality?
Yeah. So if someone is showing up in meetings and in life as the man of steel or whatever that guy's book was, I'm a badass mother effer, right? If you're showing up into meetings and they're in that embodiment, come on, bring it on, right? What is that going to elicit from the outside? A fight, a struggle. It's just natural. It's just instinct, right? You're showing up ready for a fight. Come on, try to break me. And then that'll happen, right? And if you show up soft and present and in a different kind of power, a power that's not like, try me, but a power that's like, let's try this. Let's work together. This is my power. It's an invitation for the other to be collaborative, to be gentle, to be harmonious and synergistic in how our powers can work together. So you can just think about, man, how I show up in my body and my energy really does impact what happens next in my story.
Absolutely. So let's hear the rundown, perhaps just the couple-minute version of what are the 12 coping styles, just like the listing, and then the alternative, just so we can hear the definition and perhaps see ourselves or start to a little bit like, oh yeah, that does feel kind of familiar to my experience.
The first coping style I call disconnected. And the disconnected coping style is when we essentially learned that we wouldn't be understood by our caregivers. And so we figured that maybe we don't belong in this world. So we feel separate in some indefinable way than the rest of society. We feel like an outcast. We feel like an alien or a weirdo. We feel like we don't belong in this time and space and place and planet. And so we found ways to disconnect. And we really struggle with feeling misunderstood a lot, feeling like an outsider, feeling like there's no point in even trying to explain ourselves because no one could fully understand. And that causes a lot of ruptures. And it's really not easy to maintain connection because connection feels really confusing and bad, and disconnecting is the only thing that feels safe. So if we're disconnected, the antidote is to become connected. And to do that, we learn how to feel our feelings, share our feelings, repair the ruptures, take the risk to let people know what's going on for us, let them know what we need so that we can actually get in that loop of connection and communication where things get to be a fit.
Okay.
The next coping style I call frictive, and it's when there's a lot of intensity and energy in the body. We feel like we can never stop going and moving and doing and thinking. And it's because subconsciously we're quite afraid of disappearing. This comes from not having enough physical containment as a little one. And so the physical containment being squeezed and held from all sides, especially as newborns, is what allows us to feel like we have a body and have a self and we're not disappearing. And so without that kind of physical containment, we feel like we're always at risk of coming apart and fragmenting. And so we have to create a friction that keeps us tethered to this world so that we don't essentially fall off the edge of the earth and die. So that friction means we never get to rest or pause, because in the silence and stillness, it feels like there's a void that could swallow us up. It's a very existential wound. So what it looks like as adults is you're just kind of anxious and manic and talking fast and doing a lot, and you really can't slow the self down and rest. And if you're frictive, you think about at work, it's like work always has to be some drama. There's always a rush. There's always a drama. There's always a challenge and a friction and a this, because it's the friction that makes us feel alive and feel connected to something. So the antidote to frictive is to be spacious, where things can be really easy and gentle and quiet and kind of effortless, and things don't have to be so high drama. The third coping style I call omnipotent. Word, omni, all, potent, powerful. So when we're omnipotent, we actually feel so out of control because everything affects us so deeply. We're hypersensitive. Everything in our environment impacts us so deeply. We need everything just so, or else we feel very, very reactive and very frightened and get very angry very fast. And so we feel we need to try to have complete control over everything and everyone around us. That's omnipotent, all powerful. And that's actually secretly because we don't know how to self-soothe. We don't know that instead of controlling everything out there, we could actually just take care of ourselves in here and start to feel safe. So instead, we become very bossy and demanding. And at work, we might find that our employees are scared of us. They perceive us as bullies or dominating. And really, we're just trying to prevent the chaos, right? Like as omnipotence, it feels like if I don't have everything just so, it will devolve into total chaos. And so the antidote to omnipotent is to start to feel safe. And we do this by kind of creating a psychic skin that we didn't get to develop as little ones, where we know that something outside isn't actually us. We don't have to control it and we don't have to change it. We can actually just relax and calm ourselves down inside and know that that thing out there that's out of place isn't going to kill us and isn't us, and that we're okay even when it doesn't feel okay.
Okay.
The next coping style I call deprived. This is a big one for people in their careers, but deprived is exactly what it sounds like. It's when we don't feel connected to the good stuff. So it really feels like other people can get the good stuff, but not me. I'm the unlucky one. I'm the one that experiences a lot of limits and lack. And I don't ever get to be fully resourced. I'm always grabbing and grasping and wanting and longing for the good stuff, but it always stays just out of reach. And the antidote to deprived is to become resourced. So when we're deprived, it's often really hard to get ahead financially, because no matter how much money we get, it doesn't seem to stick around. For some weird reason, we always hover around that zero balance because we're so used to feeling empty inside. But when we come out of deprived and we become resourced, we learn how to drink in the infinite well of goodness that's inside and outside, because this universe is so abundant and benevolent. And when we start to experience ourselves as living in that buoyant state of fulfillment from all that resource that we're resourcing on, lo and behold, the world starts to reflect that by giving us more income when we feel more valuable and good inside instead of feeling broken, bad, or empty inside. When we feel good inside and feel full inside, the outside start to reflect that by us making a lot more money, having a lot more opportunities, and being fulfilled in life.
All right.
So the next coping style I call symbiotic. And this was the one I was kind of bringing up at the top of the hour, where we become pushovers and people pleasers. We're really afraid of conflict. We're afraid of ever saying no, firming up, taking shape, disagreeing, having our own point of view, being separate. So we tend to attract a lot of people who are dominating, and we become kind of their sidekick and their yes person. And we kind of give up ourselves to have them. And we pretend like we have all the same preferences, but actually we're betraying ourselves to do that and to be in that twinship with them. And then after a time, it gets really annoying. And so we bail and we cut and run. And we're like, I got to get rid of you to have me. And then the pattern just continues because we find the next dominating person and we do the same exact thing over and over and over. Absolutely exhausting. And you can imagine what happens at work. I mean, it's just, we get totally emptied out, totally used feeling. And then we have to quit and leave and go to the next place and do it all over again. And we often don't feel totally respected because we don't respect ourselves. We often don't find a lot of value monetarily because we always are in that kind of assistant mentality and embodiment where we can't really get ahead because we don't know how to firm up and take aim and be kind of potent, because we just have to stay limp and malleable in order to stay in those fused connections with people. So the antidote to coming out of symbiotic is to become truly solid. And when we're solid, we know that we have all the resources and all the capability inside to be able to feed ourselves and trust ourselves and have our own compass and have our own agency. And when we do that, then we can be more honest with people. We can say no, we can set boundaries, we can become in healthy relationships that are a two-way street where there's room for two people negotiating and collaborating rather than losing ourselves in the connection with others. The next coping style I call premature. And this is when we had to sort of grow up too fast as little ones and take care of other people in the families when we were still kind of babies on our own, kind of toddler times. And so what we do when we're premature is we're overgivers, we're overachievers, overdoers. So we're the ones always planning, contributing, giving, volunteering, nurturing, cooking, caring. We're the ones always providing. And so all of our energy goes out to feeding others and we go hungry. Our needs are always last on the list. And eventually it leads to a lot of burnout. So we can feel very, very drained. Even though it feels really good giving to others, because it generally does feel good giving, if we just keep depleting ourselves and we never nourish ourselves, we never take in any of the goodness that we're giving to others, it's an equation that doesn't really work and it leads to burnout. So the antidote to coming out of premature is to become nourished, where we learn that it's actually okay for us to need and feed. When we're premature, we worry that our needs are too much and they make us needy. And so we wouldn't want to ask anyone for help or be a burden. But when we come out of premature, we know that it feels just as good to other people to feed us as it does for us to feed them. And then it becomes a loop of nourishment and it's sustainable and very fulfilling. And this definitely plays out at work. If you're the one picking up the slack for everybody, staying overtime, doing everything for everybody, and you're starting to feel really drained and depleted, you may have the premature coping style and it's time for you to be nourished.
All right.
Okay. The next coping style I call idealizing. And this is a wound about identity, really. But it's when we're really hyper-focused on our outsides, meaning anything we could measure or write down on a paper about ourselves, like our looks, our achievements, our status, our level of intelligence, our level of success. And we are constantly caught up in this rat race of comparing ourselves to people who are above us or people who are below us. And what we never get to do is just stand eye to eye and heart to heart with people and get to be human, which is the antidote to idealizing. So when we're human, we're more in touch with our sentience, the fact that we're living beings with thoughts and needs and feelings and values and our essence energy inside of us, which is so much more who we really are than any of those outside things you could measure, which always do, by the way, go up and down. Maybe today I got the best score on the quiz and maybe tomorrow I don't. And that ping-ponging up and down between I'm the best, I'm the worst, I'm the best, I'm the worst is so painful. When you're more connected to your humanity and your insides, there's no ping-ponging because you can't compare essences. And, you know, there could be a lot of freedom in that in the workplace if you're no longer the one always trying to beat everybody, beat your opponents, get the gold star, be the best. And it really starts to become about your own humanity and your needs. It could really change the game for how work starts to work for you.
Okay.
All right. The next coping style I call frustrated. And I started to speak to this a little bit when I was giving the story of the CEO who had the withstanding subtype of frustrated. But frustrated is a will injury where as we're developing our sense of will of what we can and can't control as little ones, we need to feel that we can control some things, that we're not always crushed and thwarted and blocked by our parents, but we're allowed to have a say, we're allowed to make choices, we're allowed to have a will. And if for whatever reason our will is blocked, we become frustrated and there's nowhere for our power or our anger to go. And so it gets turned inwards and it actually turns into self-sabotage. This is major for the workplace. If we're always feeling like life is hard, I'm stuck, I can't is such a key word for frustrated. Things are hard, I can't, all of that, that is a frustrated experience. And the truth is, that's how it was when we were little. We couldn't. Like the thing outside the parents were so much bigger than us. Of course we couldn't, right? But we've been carrying that baggage with us and calling it true now as adults, which is what was happening with this man who felt he had to be the man of steel and life is hard and all these challenges, right? And it's like, once we melted that and we brought him into a state of ease, he was able to get in flow, which is the antidote to frustrated. Coming out of frustrated means owning our no and saying no to things we don't want to do and saying yes to things we do want to do. And so I say, we've got to say no to get in flow. So if you find yourself at work feeling frustrated, like things are not going the way you want them to go, things aren't fair, things are unjust, things are such a struggle, think of the places that you haven't yet said, you know what? No, I have a boundary here and I don't want to do X, Y, and Z. Once you hold that no with your universe, boom, things get in flow and you start to get what you do want instead of always getting what you don't want, which is the frustrated coping style.
Alrighty.
And the next coping style is kind of a pair to frustrated. It's another will injury, but it's the opposite, which is when our will was actually overindulged instead of overly frustrated. It can also be overly indulged. I call this the indulged coping style. This happens when we're either neglected, so no one's there to block our will, or we're overindulged by our parents. But basically, whatever we want, we get. And these are kids who kind of would fail the Stanford marshmallow experiment of if you don't eat one now, you can have two later, right? We never develop that capacity in our frontal lobes to have any self-restraint. We just want what we want when we want it, and we want to get it, and we want to get it now, and we want to get it at any cost. And we're not aware at all of how we impact others. And so that entitlement, that indulgence, that impatience, that me, it's really, really rough. And if you find yourself at work feeling like other people don't trust you, or they're kind of shunning you, or they're kind of like, this one's not a team player, you might be struggling with the indulged coping style. In some ways, it's one of the most shameful coping styles to have. I had it. This is how I've discovered all 12 is because I have found them in myself. It's a hard one to reckon with, but if we find the courage to reckon with it, it is a revelation, because really when we're indulged, we were just lacking a village. We were lacking a sense of belonging, because when you know you belong to a tribe, then you know how you impact others, because you all impact one another. And so we've been living in solitary confinement as empty, lonely consumers. So of course we just want to fill that hole. It makes so much sense. But coming out of indulged is to enter the antidote of interbeing. Interbeing is a term coined by the late Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. And it means that within every being is every other being. That in this computer that we're talking through, the silicone parts were mined by miners, and it was part of the dirt and the earth where trees were growing. And all of those things are inside of this computer that we're looking at each other through. Like everything that is interwoven, inextricably interwoven with everything else. We're all interconnected. And so coming out of indulged is realizing, hey, it's not just me here. I'm part of a larger whole. And when we do that, we work so much better with our teams. And we actually end up getting what we want, truly want, in a more holistic way than when we're just grabbing in the moment in that impulsive, entitled way.
All right. And number 10.
So the next one I call the squashed coping style. This one could really be at work too. So this is when, as we were developing our sense of power and beauty and magnetism as little ones, somebody was jealous. And so they actually squashed us. They didn't want us to have that beauty and that power and that shine. And so we now inadvertently squash ourselves. We keep ourselves small. We dim our light. We hide our shine. We play small. We're always being the nice one or the invisible one or the one who doesn't want to step on toes or threaten anyone. And it's kind of like the archetypes of Cinderella or Harry Potter. And when we're squashed, we're usually not aware at all that we have this special sauce, that we're a Cinderella or a Harry Potter. We don't realize that we're actually so beautiful and so powerful and so radiant and so potent that it makes other people envious. We're not aware of that, but we do keep ourselves small unconsciously. And so coming out of squashed is to finally be erect, is to stand up into our full height and be as radiant and potent and beautiful and powerful as we really are, so that we start to become a true leader and an inspiration rather than this fear that we'd be a threat. So when we own that we are the radiant, beautiful belle of the ball, things really start to work for us in a new way, and other people start to respond to us in a new way. And we're no longer bullied, and we're no longer shunned, and we actually become a real leader and inspiration. So this could be huge for people at work. If you're like, why does everyone else seem to get ahead and I always have to play the nice guy? You may be squashed and your story's not over. You can play in the big leagues. You can go to the ball. It's time to go to the ball.
Alrighty.
The next coping style I call provocative. If we're provocative, unfortunately, our parents played out a love triangle with us, where one of them was our object of desire, and they kind of overindulged that and played into that with us of like, yes, you are my special one, and I wish mommy would go away, or whatever the vibe is. And then the other parent was jealous. And there is a way to come out of provocative and become clear. That's the antidote to provocative. So when we are clear, we understand where the boundaries are. Okay, this person's my business associate, this person's my secretary, and this person's my lover. And those things are very different, and I'm going to act very differently with those different people because I'm clear. And the final one I call constricted. So this is when during that time of proto-puberty, when we've got all this exciting mojo coming through our little bodies, and we are no longer these chubby toddlers, but we want to run and jump and play and tag, you're it and come chase me and be competitive and excitable. And during this time, how our parents respond to this animal alive part of us determines how we feel about this part of us. Whether our parents are overly controlling of that, they say, don't do that, put your head down, we don't do this is bad, aggression is bad, whatever that is. Or if we had parents who were overly amorous and we saw that that animal part of them got them in trouble, in either case, if they were overly controlling us or if they were out of control, in either case, we learned that the animal, instinctive, wild part of ourselves is bad, and that controlling that part of ourselves is good. And now we're constricted and we've got to hold everything in. We can't spill out. We can't make a mess. We can't be too wild. We can't be aggressive. We can't be expressive. We can't be tender. We've got to keep it all held in, because if we don't keep it all held in, maybe someone would judge us as weird or bad or wrong. And in all of those cases, we would feel humiliated, possibly shunned, and none of that feels okay to us. So we've got a tight lid on ourselves. We have to be hyper controlled. So in the same way, an omnipotent person tries to control everything and everyone outside, a constricted person tries to control everything inside. Like, I should never fart. I should never scream. I should never do anything weird. It's all got to be held in. And the antidote to constricted is to become free. And when we're free, we get to trust our animal nature and trust that everything we do and everything that we are is innocent, and that no judge out there has the right to decide what's innocent or guilty, that we can have an inner authority and we know that we're innocent, and we know that our instincts are actually holy and beautiful and will lead us exactly where we want to go. We don't have to control them. It's actually the repression of them that causes them to act out. But when we know that all these animal parts of us are so good, there's nothing to restrict or constrict around, then they only do good. So when we're coming out of constricted, we become free. We're able to express and desire and follow our instincts and be more animal and alive and vibrant. And when we would stop resisting the flow of life, we can finally feel all the pleasures of being alive. And how this shows up in work is that things start to be a lot more creative and flowy and less literally constricted. Like all the ways that it was like, oh, well, we can't do this and we can't do that and we can't do this. It's like, wait, the sky's the limit. the world is our oyster. Let's do anything that we feel like doing. I'm free. And it's like, oh my God, the workplace becomes so different and the results become so different at work once we're free.
Okay, beautiful. Well, I really appreciate you going into the full rundown of the dozen here. And what I like about this lineup is these are patterns I think that we can recognize, like in ourselves or others. Like, oh yeah, I know someone who's kind of like that. I know someone who's kind of like that. And it's sort of handy to have some language and some categories to operate with. I'm curious, beyond just sort of listening and reflecting, how do we know which ones are active in us, and what do we do once we know that?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, drsamrader.com, and take the free quiz. It takes like 2 minutes, and that'll give you your quote unquote top coping style, your most prevalent one. And once you do that, there's like a really sweet little $11 mini course you can take to start unraveling and dissolving and resolving it. And then you can also take once you get inside that mini course, you can take a full length test. They can give you all of your coping styles and to what degree you have them. And you can start working on all of those as well. But it's funny you also mentioned the thing about people at work, because once you start to understand the coping styles, and by the way, there's also a free pocket guide on my website that describes all of them, so you can kind of have that handy. You start feeling less annoyed with other people when you understand that it's just a coping style and where it comes from. So for example, if there's someone at work who's frictive, who's always like, hey, can I have your attention? Blah, 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 blah. And they're really like needy and intense. And you're like, oh, that person won't leave me alone. You can be like, oh, they're frictive. They didn't have enough physical containment as little ones. Maybe I can just give them a squeeze and a hug. And wow, they're much calmer now. Wow, they're bugging me a lot less, right? So once you start to understand the motivation of other people's behavior, it also causes really great team building. You're much easier to manage others and be managed by others when you understand what makes them tick and how you can support them in being a little less in their coping styles and a little more in the antidotes.
Dr. Sam's about to share some of her favorite things. One of my favorite things is our sponsors. Check them out. One sponsor to check out is Harvard Business Review. This brilliant magazine, published at hbr.org, is the leading destination for smart management thinking. Fun fact, HBR has been mentioned in 108 episodes of the show. That's because HBR has great stuff that comes up often. They've got explainer videos, podcasts, real-world case studies, and much more. I think of HBR each night that I put on my special orange glasses. Their article, Will Blue Light Glasses Improve Your Sleep?, revealed that those who wore them reported better sleep and a 7% improvement in work performance as compared to those who wore the sham glasses. So I cite HBR anytime anyone tells me that I look silly wearing them. Now, much of HBR's content is available for free when you sign up at their site. Subscriptions that get you unlimited content cost $10 a month. If you visit hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME, you can save 10% off of that subscription. Again, to save 10% off of your HBR subscription, go to www.hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME. And big thanks to our sponsor, Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing for your future. You don't need a lot of money or expertise to invest with Acorns. In fact, you can get started with just your spare change. Acorns recommends an expert-built portfolio that fits you and your money goals, then automatically invests your money for you. NerdWallet.com, whom I love on these sorts of matters, gives Acorns a whopping 4.7 stars and says, quote, if you want to make the most of your spare change, there's no better place to do that than Acorns. Head to acorns.com/awesome or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. And we got a legal disclaimer here. It may not be representative of all clients. Tier 1 compensation provided. Compensation provides an incentive to positively promote Acorns. View important disclosures at acorns.com/awesome. Investing involves risk, including the loss of principal. Please consider your objectives, risk tolerance, and Acorns' fees before investing. Acorns Advisors LLC, Acorns, is an SEC-registered investment advisor. Brokerage services are provided to clients of Acorns by Acorns Securities LLC, member FINRA/SIPC. For more information, visit acorns.com. One sponsor to check out is Storyworth. Whenever I'm thinking about meaningful Father's Day gifts, Storyworth leaps to mind. Storyworth helps you preserve precious memories and stories from your father for years to come. Each week, Storyworth emails your loved ones a thought-provoking question that you get to help pick, such as, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? I personally love the prompt so much that I have refreshed Storyworth's questions page many times looking for more. Storyworth makes the writing process super quick and easy. All your loved one needs to do is respond to that email with a story, and then you get a quick copy of that And after a year of this fun, Storyworth compiles your loved one's stories and photos into a beautiful keepsake hardcover book that you'll be able to share and revisit for generations to come. Families love Storyworth so much, they've got 25,000 five-star reviews on Trustpilot and have millions of stories preserved. So give all the fathers in your life a unique, heartfelt gift they'll all cherish for years. Storyworth. Right now, you can save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/awesome. That's storyworth.com/awesome to save $10 on your first purchase. Okay. Well, now could you share a favorite study or experiment or bit of research?
One of my favorite studies was of a troop of orangutans in Africa who all of the alpha males contracted a disease from eating from a garbage pile that was infected, and they all died. And so traditionally, when new adolescent males join a troop, they're sort of hazed by the alpha males, and the females are not allowed to groom them. But once all the alpha males died out, when the new adolescents would come from other tribes, because that's what happens, the adolescents leave their troop to go to a new troop, so there's no inbreeding, they would be welcomed by the new matriarchy who would groom them and touch them and welcome them. And they created a completely peaceful, egalitarian, anti-hierarchical troop that survived for 9 generations forward, that just had a completely different culture. And why I love that study so much is that even though things can seem so effed up right now on the planet, all it takes is one shift in how we treat one another to create an entirely new culture here on Earth. And that's my wish for humanity.
All right. And a favorite book?
I love the Hafiz, the Sufi poet, and this book translated by Daniel Ladinsky called The Gift. It's Sufi poetry.
All right. And is there a key nugget you share that really seems to connect and resonate with folks? They quote it back to you often?
There are no bad people. Only hurt people hurt people. And we all need more love, not less.
And if folks want to learn more or get in touch, where would you point them?
Come to my website, www.drsamrader.com, or you can follow me on Instagram at Dr. Sam Rader, DrSamRader. I would love to hear from you. Feel free to DM me. I'd love to chat about what you loved about this interview or not, or I'd love to just meet all of you.
All right. And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
Yeah, see if you can spot any patterns, the things that are bugging you about your vocational life. See if you can spot a pattern in that is familiar, that it's not just now, it's not just in this job, but it's been haunting you and with you for as long as you can remember. And then see if you can trace that pattern back to actually your early experience as a little one, how that's actually in a reenactment of a drama from home. And when you do that, sometimes just that awareness and seeing that it is a pattern, it's not just this one thing that's happening today at work, but it's actually the pattern, that once you recognize that pattern and just hold it for what it is, sometimes that alone can start to dissolve and resolve it on its own.
All right. Lovely. Well, Sam, this has been fun. I wish you much luck and transformations with you and your clients.
Thank you for tolerating my woo, and it's been a pleasure.
All right, so that was our typical interview. And now for the second portion of this episode, we're going to drop into a coding session in which I present an issue for Dr. Sam, and we work through the thing the way she does. I would note and highlight here that in this conversation, there were many very long silences, just kind of sitting with things. And just for the sake of your experience, we've reduced all of those mega long silences, which sometimes went 1 or 2 or 3 full minutes, down to about 5 seconds or so. And just so you get the sense, oh, this was a long silence is what happened there. Okay. All right, Sam, we're doing a coding session. Dr. Sam, tell us, what are we doing here?
What's up, Pete? I'm so excited to support you today. So let me tell you what a session looks like. You'll start by telling me about a problem. It could be anything, big, small, personal, circumstantial, relational, emotional, any problem at all. And it's really the way you tell me about the problem. I'll be taking furious notes as you're speaking, writing down every word you say, because the way you tell me about the problem is what's going to show me the coding underneath that problem that's creating that problem. So that problem is a manifestation of a certain symbolic landscape that was programmed into you in your first 5 years of life. And once you tell me about the problem, I see the pattern behind the problem, we're going to set the problem aside. And we're not going to focus on the concrete anymore. We're not going to talk about any circumstances, people, specifics, the problem you brought in. We're going to say bye-bye. And instead, we're just going to focus on the coding itself. And what I'm going to do is drop us into a kind of liminal state. And this is the time where people say, oh my goodness, what's going on here? And it's just that I use intentionally vague symbolic language to mirror the coding back to itself. And when that happens, it's a very dropped in kind of mystical experience that we get to have together. And all it takes for the code to dissolve and resolve on its own is to have a clear mirror of itself. So in a way, source code is kind of like homeopathic medicine. We're just giving the thing a taste of itself so that it can dissolve and resolve on its own. And it does that by when we just sit with it and we don't try to fix it or change it in any way. We just sit with the glitchy code and then it dissolves. Once it dissolves, we'll go back to kind of this infinite field of all potentiality. And from there, we can write together a new line of code. And that new code can generate a new fractal pattern where you start feeling really differently. Your energy feels different. Your emotions feel different. You show up differently. But more interestingly, the world shows up differently because you're in a new fractal. You're in a new matrix. You're in a new reality. We've recoded your reality, not just you. This is not about mindset. This is really not about the mind. We're really recoding the fabric of reality itself together.
Okay, that sounds high stakes. Well, it's so funny. Well, all these terms. So, Dr. Sable, a lot of this lingo is like, for me, in my background and experiences, I don't know what the word is. It's a little wild. Like one time, have you ever heard of the Landmark Forum?
Mm-hmm.
So I did that. And I thought what was interesting is that they had a whole lingo in terms of I'm inventing a possibility, And so in a way, I found it kind of cumbersome, but ultimately valuable. So just kind of where I'm coming from right now, and we use some of the lingo about the fractal symbolic landscape and coding and energy, just so you're aware. I don't know if this is, I don't want to minimize or misrepresent what you're up to. In my world, I'm just translating this into Pete science-y terms. And I'm thinking about this through this, this kind of sounds like neuroscience-y things. Like I have associations and connections and experiences and dominant patterns or highways of neuronal connectivity and patterns such that something can trigger a thing in another way and so forth. And so in a way, like what you say, in some ways, it seems kind of trippy. Like, huh? Is that like real? is this like religious almost? But in other ways, like, well, no, this just sort of sounds in other ways like the neuroscience of, you've had experiences and patterns of dealing with the world and things that have gotten associated with each other. And by going at it from a deeper level, not just sort of like the cognitive, mental, whatever, we have a different vector of change and disruption and reshifting and reconnection. So I don't know if that's how you're thinking about it at all, but that's how I'm thinking about it. And it's working for me. And so I don't know. What do you think of that?
That's great. Yeah, well, so I was a neuroscience major at Vassar, and I was a cog-sci major, which is neuroscience, computer science, AI, robotics, linguistics. So I basically studied consciousness from the Western perspective, but I was a dual major. I was also an Eastern religion major, so Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism. So I studied consciousness from the Eastern perspective and the Western perspective. And I was a clinical psychologist for 18 years. And so I understand why it would make sense to talk about things neurologically. And I might be wrong. I just might be dead wrong, because how can you know what the hell is really going on beyond what you can see with your eyes? But what I'm doing now with source code feels so very different than the 18 years that I practiced psychology. It doesn't feel like it's to do with the mind, but you'll have to tell me, because what I find is that when people start hearing about source code, a lot of people have the exact reaction you do, which is, why is she using all these weird words when we're really just going to do a therapy session, right? And then when they experience it experientially, they're like, this is actually what she said it was. She's just trying to put words to this thing that is new. And so, 100 years ago, when Freud and his associates were naming the idea of the unconscious, people thought that there was this unseen part of the mind that you can't experience, but it's there and it's affecting things. That was insane and revolutionary and radical. And I'm just suggesting, hey, there's an even layer deeper than the unconscious. And I called it the symbolic realm. Who knows what people will call it eventually. But I've discovered a layer deeper. And that's what we're here to play with together. And you'll tell me if you're experiencing it differently than the mind, because what people experience is that it's more of an embodied energetic shift than a mental shift. And that's what source code does, is we shift the embodiment, not the mind.
Yeah, that's cool. And certainly, and I'm not Mr. Hostile Skeptic, just to be clear. I mean, and so the cool results you've seen with friends of ours, and just even like the categorization, the typology you put out there in terms of the dozen archetypes that showed up as like, oh yeah, I do see that and that and that. And so I found that useful in of itself as like a pattern in terms of, oh, hey, I've gotten certified in the Myers-Briggs, and I think that's cool. And those sorts of systems. And I've also experienced how often thinking doesn't do the trick in terms of how you feel about a situation, and dunking in cold water or doing a pump and iron does. So I think there's definitely, we humans are multi-faceted creatures. And so, yeah, let's see what happens.
Fan-freaking-tastic. Yeah, so that thing you were saying about the mind not always being able to move the needle on our experience, because you can try to think new thoughts, but ultimately stay in the same patterns. That's why source code focuses on energetic embodiment. And what I've noticed is whatever is visceral for us feels like, whatever feels real in our bodies becomes real for us. I call it like the visceral real. And so we're going to be shifting your visceral embodiment of what it feels like to be Pete. We're going to be liberating you from lifelong patterns and what I like to call invisible prisons, which are the coping styles that were encoded into you in the first 5 years of life. And we all have several coping styles. I had all 12. And today we're probably going to see like 5 to 8 of them pop up in your problem that you bring up.
Oh, wow. Yeah, ambitious.
That's just usually what happens when someone tells me a problem. It's very rare that I see less than 4 coping styles marrying together. But what's amazing about this, and why it doesn't ever get boring for me or any of the people on my team who do the coding work, is that in the same way that in music, there's only 12 notes on a scale, but you can play infinite songs and infinite melodies. You can write infinite melodies. Each of us is like our own song. So the way that those 12 things have married together inside of you creates your own unique blueprint of how your life unfolds. So we'll be untangling that blueprint, dissolving and resolving it, so that we can architect something new together that feels even more like who you really are. Because these coping styles are defense mechanisms. They're not who you really are. They're universal ways of responding to us not getting something we need in our first 5 years of life. And so when we dissolve these rigid patterns, oh my God, more of our true essence comes forward, which is just, love.
Game on. I like love.
Let's do it. So you need to tell me about a problem for a minute.
Okay. So I was thinking, this happened just this morning, but it is a sort of part of a larger pattern. And it's like, and I find what I would like in my world is to have a greater, I don't know, you might call it discomfort threshold or tolerance or toughness or resiliency. And it's funny, like the things that can frustrate me is, I'm thinking Dr. David Burns, like should statements. It feels like things are not as they quote should be. And especially if like there's a sequence of a lot of them in little succession, like this morning, right? I was just trying to get the kids ready for school. And it's like, okay, I've got to pack the lunch. Okay, sure. I'm ready to pack that lunch, but then the lunch boxes are still kind of dirty. It's like, oh, shoot. Okay, well, I guess I got to hand wash those real quick. We've got some cheese. We got some blueberry stuff stuck in there. Sure. So let's get them. But then I've got a big old kids feeding tray from like a high chair situation, blockading the sink. And it's a little frustrating. I can't like get the things in position just to physically wash them. And then there's a little bit of time pressure, it's like, oh, okay, I get out the door at a certain time. And so I'm feeling like, that's annoying. Like, I guess I got to move this out of the way, but I guess my wife is concerned that might have soap on it and get soap on the floor. So I'm going to have to, so it's like, before I do the thing, I have to do the thing before the thing. So I'm going to, wash that top tray. Fine. Set that aside, wash the lunch trays. Well, now I don't even have the counter space available to set them down, to put items in there, just because we've fallen a little behind with tidying the kitchen. And so then I do that. And then my kids just keep calling out for my attention for this thing or that thing. And I'm trying to focus because I'm finding this somewhat difficult. And my body's also going through a little period of, I don't know if it's the basic rest activity cycle, like, hey, I'm energized and oh, now I'm kind of tired. And, back and forth. That's kind of what happens. And so I'm in sort of like a tired spell. We got the time pressure. We got the numerous steps I did not anticipate occurring in order to make these lunches, and I'm just feeling kind of super frustrated. And I do think I do a pretty good job of not yelling or being a real meanie head to those around me and bringing them down. But internally, I am super frustrated, and I wish I could just be a little more chill in terms of, hey, it's not that big a deal. You know what? We're going to get through it. It's going to be fine. And this is the case in many scenarios where I'm living my life, doing my thing, and someone wants me to kind of comply with their system or process or edit or change to the way I think it should be done. And I just think it's way stupid. And I feel aggravated. And it feels a little shameful or embarrassing to say, like, I know, privileged or whatever, like, oh, the way I think it should be is how it should be. And if I must deign to, bend and comply with another system or process that I don't think is logical, then I find that is just puts me out so much. But on the flip side, I think of it, it's like, well, hey, you know what? I've been self-employed for 15 years. And in a way, it's like I've kind of gotten a little spoiled. It's like I've kind of gotten to do things the way I like doing them, how they should be done in many contexts, in many ways for a long time. And I feel like in some ways, the muscle associated with being chill, patient, flexible with other people's systems and processes that there's like the normal employees deal with constantly. Like I've almost gotten really spoiled such that even a modest dose of that is enough to get me all flustered. And I would like to be more calm, peaceful, loving, patient, flexible, accommodating, open, curious about situations than just mad and flustered I kind of feel like a child. And I'd like to be able to grow up and be more loving and mature about such irritations.
Beautiful. So that was like absolutely perfect description of a problem. It helps me so much. So I already see all the coding in here, but I want to circle the keywords. So that's going to take me a minute.
Okay.
And then once we drop in, I don't know if you had any plans to take notes, but it's best for you to not take notes. All of this is being recorded, right?
All right. It is. Yep.
Okay, great. And so you just get to stay in your presence and not too much in your left brain, because we're going to have like a beautiful little journey together. But right now, I'm just going to start to use my left brain to see the pattern here very clearly. So give me just a moment.
All righty.
Okay, great. So what I see is 5 different coping styles. And one of the 5, we have 2 different subtypes active right now. So there's essentially 6 things here we're working with. And the way they've married together has created your thing. And what I normally do during a coding session is I don't even say that. I'm just saying this because you're still wrapping your head around this whole system. But I'm not even going to tell you what coping styles I'm seeing. We can talk about it at the end if you want. But it's better to bypass.
I did the quiz, but we'll see.
Yeah, the quiz gives you one, but we all have several. So there's a full length test that gives you the real picture. But a coding session's, even better at going deep into knowing really all of the pieces and how they fit together. So from here on out in the session, we're no longer going to think about trays of food or lunchboxes or wives or children. We're just going to feel into the fractal pattern of how there's a way things should be. And we're just going to feel that as an energetic. This should thing has been really central and really important. Let's just feel what the energy of should feels like, almost like a cartoon. Like we're not going to think about any specifics, just this should thing.
I don't know how long we're feeling we're feeling it.
Yeah. I forgot to warn you, most of a coding session is spent in the silence, but it does really help me.
Okay.
It does really help me to help you if you tell me, like, where are we right now? Like we started feeling into should and what came up.
Well, when you said cartoon, I didn't quite know what you meant by that, but I went ahead and visualized, like a cartoon character. And so what came to mind was just like a very tall cartoon character with and like authoritatively like wagging the finger. You should do this or you should not do that. He's like very laying down the law.
Yeah, so let's just be with this part. The tall authoritative thing that lays down the law. It's been such a big part of things, and we just really want to feel it. And the first half of a coding session can be a little bit uncomfortable because we don't try to fix it or change it in any way. We're just bringing these lifelong patterns out from the shadows and into the light. And we're just being with them.
Okay.
So there's this tall, authoritative thing that lays down the law. Yeah. What's happening for you now?
I don't know. Not much. I don't feel as uncomfortable. In some ways, my brain just keeps going into other places, like random songs entering my head. And then I try to go back to, oh yeah, tall, authoritative discomfort.
Yeah, what are the songs?
Well, it's talking about kids. They're the Danny Go songs, if you're familiar with this YouTube personality. It's just, they're just very silly.
What are the lyrics?
They're doing different dances. Let's see. Well, he's got the wiggle dance.
Mm-hmm,
Can you wiggle fast? Can you wiggle slow? Can you wiggle high? Can you wiggle low? We've got the march like a millipede. They're mostly like dance tunes that are, they're for kids, but he's got enough pop styling on them. They're kind of catchy for grown-ups too.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense that these songs are coming through because it's kind of right what we're talking about. So let me bring those in just a moment. But we just want to feel this authoritative law thing that creates a lot of pressure. And we just want to feel that feeling of no space.
Mm-hmm.
And things feeling, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny now. Now this reminds me, I remember my next door neighbor, they got a sleepover at his house and his dad said to him, drink your juice first before you eat your cereal. Otherwise the juice will taste sour. Or was it the other way? It could have been the reverse. I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I've had orange juice in cereal. But I remember thinking at the time, and geez, I was young. I very much did not like that. And it wasn't even talking to me. Because I was thinking, we kids have so little leeway and choice in terms of the way we live our lives. You know, got a school, rules, chores. Like to usurp, I don't think I knew that word at that age, a child's right to eat their breakfast in the sequence they see fit upset me. And I thought that's wrong. It's, you know, it's not a big deal, right? In terms of like, that is a valid observation about, you know, how flavors work in a breakfast. But it really bothered me.
Yeah.
And I think I maybe purposely ate it in the opposite order.
Yeah.
Just to assert my independence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a big part of the fractal that we're working with today.
Yeah.
I call it the subverting subtype of frustrated, but we'll get there later. But yeah, to assert your independence, did you say?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And so when something outside is so rigid, the insides get resistant to that outside thing.
Okay.
And that's just natural. So let's just really feel that.
The inner resistance to outer rigidity. That's what we're feeling?
Yeah, that there's so little leeway and so little choice.
Well, it's funny. These childhood memories are coming up. Maybe probably old news for you. But now it pops up and you let me know if we're supposed to be sitting with emotion. I guess I'm just free associating. It's like, I remember I might have been in 5th grade. I was in a play at a very minor role of Oliver Twist. I remember the rehearsals were so long, but we were expected to be there for all of them. Even though I had such a small role, just a few lines. It's like, do we really need me to be there for every rehearsal? Would I have such a small spot? And it really bothered me. And I quit the play. And I remember I wrote a letter to Mrs. Hillary, and I was so nervous about it. It was like, because quitting's bad. But I thought, like, they're going to be okay without me. And this is just nuts. How many hours? And not because there was something in particular I felt I needed to be doing, but it's just like, I was just like, I need my free time. this is like taking up like half of my free time, the evenings after school. And it's not that much fun and it doesn't really matter that much. So like, what the heck am I doing here? So I felt the need to exit that, but I also felt pretty guilty and it didn't have the boldness to speak it to her face. I wrote her a letter.
Yeah, this is great. So you've kind of entered what I call the Hall of Mirrors. It's part of a coding session where you start to see how this fractal pattern has shown up in all areas of life, even dating back to early childhood, which was actually the genesis was early childhood. Once you reach the Hall of Mirrors, that's beautiful. And then we set all of that aside and we try to not think of any more concrete memories because you have evidence now that this has been a pattern forever. And we're just going to sit with the energetics of how little free space and how little free time. So we're just going to feel that. All the blockading energetically. We're not going to do anything about it. We're just going to be with what it's like to have no space, so much pressure, and such a big, heavy thing about should. And there's such little room for choice or leeway. And it's all so frustrating. And in this tight environment where there's no space and no choice and everything's so frustrating and difficult, it really feels like there's only two ways to go, which is to get things in the right position, the way they should be, or to toughen and be able to tolerate how awful this all feels.
Well, yeah, it's funny. Like, I think, I don't know if this is on the menu, but I guess I just kind of want to rebel dramatically in terms of just like, flagrantly do the opposite.
Right.
As an assertion of will.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's when the authority outside has been so rigid and forceful, it really feels like the only way to have will is to resist the outside thing.
Yeah.
So it's like either be the employee who resists or tolerates, or be self-employed and get to have everything my way.
Yeah.
So it's like either have no control and withstand how awful it feels, or have all the control.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're just feeling like that split and that impossible place to be in.
I guess it doesn't feel so impossible. It feels kind of awesome to...
It would be so awesome if it worked.
Mm-hmm.
But there's blueberries in the lunchbox. It doesn't work.
Well, I guess in that context, yeah. I mean, I think self-employment was like, it's kind of working for me. So I guess I'm just not sure if I'm picking up the thread you're laying down.
Just metaphorically, like that need for complete control because things feel so out of control and so rigid.
Oh, yes. Some zones you just don't have that. And here we are, back to the frustration.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
And how all these things marry together. Like there's such a low threshold for feeling reactive to things not being in the right place.
Yeah, there is.
Because it really feels like there's a right place and a wrong place.
Mm-hmm. It does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that split of right and wrong and should keeps things feeling really tough and really difficult and really a lot of pressure and really blocked.
Well, you might call it the Hall of Mirrors stuff. Like, sure enough, more and more things pop up along these lines, which is interesting, but I'm trying to follow instructions and just sit with the vibe, the energy, the mood of that. I don't know, maybe this is just my overstimulated life or the condition of us in 2024. It's just sort of boring. But in a way, it's good. It's almost like, yeah, that whole rigidity thing felt awful when we started sitting with it in silence, but now it's just kind of dull. And maybe that's all things without change, or maybe some magic is happening right now.
Well, let's discover together if it's dissolving and resolving, or if there's just like a numbing to this condition that feels inevitable.
Okay.
Is the rigidity loosening, or is the rigidity feel so woven into the fabric of everything that it's just an inevitability?
I guess my vibe is more like as I clearly visualize whatever the lunchbox mess situation or other scenarios, the memories that pop up in the Hall of Mirrors, it's more of it's like, it's not that big a deal. So, I mean, which comparatively, that seems like a nice upgrade, going to neutral from, that seems swell. It's just sort of curious, like, how about that? So that's what's happening right now.
Yeah, something's starting to feel a little more neutral around the stuff of life that can sometimes be a mess and sometimes be unpredictable.
Yeah.
That organic quality to life, that aliveness of life.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for us to still feel the old fractal just a little bit more, where that authoritative thing that lays down the law and splits right from wrong, and splits should from shouldn't, and splits juice after cereal or cereal after juice. That thing creates so much blockading, makes things so difficult, gives no space, so much pressure, and this sense that everything must comply. And so frustrating and so constricting. And it feels like we can either have no control in such a rigid system, or get control by undermining and resisting, or get control by being the authority.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these options suck.
Again, I don't mind being being the authority. I guess, but sometimes you just can't be, and so that's
Yeah.
So that could be frustrating. It's like I'm not
Yeah.
the master of lunchboxes. Life is unfolding.
Yeah, exactly. Being this kind of authority, not real authority. We're talking about, like, hopefully by the end of this session, we'll start to feel real authority that's not authoritarian, but being the kind of authority that lays down the law about right and wrong. That's not that pleasant of a place to be in either. It's still quite tight, and resisting what is and feeling very unchill.
Yeah.
And very low threshold for discomfort. And so even though it feels like in this system where everything's so tight and rigid, it is best to be on top and the one laying down the law. That is true. But remember that the real issue is this system, that any position in this system is not a fun position, and not a position that ends up feeling good for anyone. Because in this system, there's so little leeway. There's so little choice. There's so little free time or space. So little freedom. There's so little room for life itself, for like an aliveness and a connection with the organic nature of life that can't be split into columns of right and wrong, or should and shouldn't. It's just the kaleidoscopic unfoldment of all that is, that started with the Big Bang. So what's happening for you now?
I guess more of the same. Just like, all right, these blueberries don't seem like such a big deal.
Do they seem like? What are blueberries in the new fractal?
I'm just like, yep, that happens.
Yeah, they're natural.
Yeah.
Something gets to be natural.
Mm-hmm.
So when when nothing's laying down the law and things get to be natural, things just get to feel more connected.
Yeah.
And more safe, really.
Yeah.
And more free. There's so much more room for choice and leeway and freedom.
Right on.
Yeah. And it just gets to be more easy and more satisfying. And things get to feel more felt, like the insides and the outsides get to like be together in a more fleshy, yummy way. Like it's okay to make that organic kind of contact without the law, be more natural.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So you familiar with the Tao Te Ching?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Like Taoism, like that idea of nature being the way, the Tao. And there's this poem in there that says, when the Tao is lost, there's morality. When morality is lost, there is religion. When religion is lost, there is law. So we're going back to nature today, to that place that doesn't need law, that's just governed by instinct, because instinct is what has allowed our human and animal ancestors to survive and thrive for billions of years in perfect harmony with each other and with the earth and with themselves. Okay. So let's just see if you can really feel these new patterns in a visceral way. Because like I was saying before with the visceral real, whatever feels visceral in an embodied way becomes our new reality. So really feel this new embodiment of connected. Really feel what that feels like inside, energetically, to feel connected to the blueberry and everything else. And feeling safe and feeling free. Things get to be easy and satisfying. Really feel what all of that feels like in your system. Do you have any words for what the energy feels like in your body now?
I'd say kind of relaxed, kind of chill.
Awesome. So that wish about being a little more chill has come true. We've granted your wishes.
Oh, that's right. That's what we said.
So yeah, just feel that chill feeling for just a second, because we're wanting to let that become the new normal of what it feels like to be Pete. That wonderful chill feeling. I think what's amazing is how, your embodiment has shifted now, how differently you feel, and how you'll walk through life so differently through this embodiment. And also you'll notice there's going to be less blockades because we shifted that pattern.
Yes, that's what I'm most curious about. It's like, okay, it feels like not a big deal now. Let's see how it feels in the heat of battle. And then, that'll be cool.
Well, that's the thing is that battle's not going to be the fractal anymore. We're not doing battle anymore. We're doing ease and satisfaction and flow, really being in flow and in connection with everything, like real power versus force. So battle is no longer the name of the game. So I'm going to be so curious to see what unfolds for you. And I think it would be really cool to have a third one, believe it or not, where we unpack, what happens next.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Well, I appreciate that. And I'm glad I'm glad you find this worth your while. But yeah, that sounds interesting. I appreciate it. And I am quite curious. And that would be fun to close the loop in such a way.
I'd be so honored, Pete. I'm truly so honored that you even tried this with me. And I'm just, happy to help.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I really appreciate that. That's very kind and awesome. Thank you. Hope you have a fantastic rest of the day.
Thanks, Pete.
Next up for part C here is a follow-up conversation I have with Dr. Sam, in which I say, hey, this is kind of what I noticed and experienced and observed going through things after the session. Well, Dr. Sam, howdy. Here we are again.
Pete, it's a pleasure.
Okay, so we talked about making this a trilogy, and we've never done that before, but in such a trilogy, what would, I guess this would be our Return of the Jedi or our, I don't know that many trilogy. Rocky 3, I guess they kept making more.
Definitely Star Wars. It's a yes for me.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
So I would love to know what the heck has happened since our session. Like, did you notice anything?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it was funny because the most direct test comparison would be in a morning getting ready for school with the kids, right? Because that's where we kind of dug into. And it so happened that it was spring break in between when we talked, but today was the first day back. And in a way, it was interesting because as an experiment, it really was set up to be a pretty hard one because I think I had worked out a little too hard recently, still feeling kind of sore. I didn't sleep very well. Was a little bit out of the groove, several days of not prepping for the morning situation. Oh, and then our lights weren't working in the kitchen. So it's kind of semi in the dark during the prep. So I was like, okay, so we got a few factors that would make this harder than average. And yet, I noticed some things that were irritating, but I was pretty fine. It's so funny because going from super irritable to fine-ish is a big upgrade, even though it doesn't seem as cool as going from okay to amazing, It's like good to great is a cool book title. Like terrible to all right-ish is not as compelling a title, but it was pretty cool. So, I mean, it's one data point, but I mean, I'm intrigued and eager to, get into some more. And that's what I'm thinking.
I was thinking it would be so cool to unpack what's happened since then, besides just this pretty awesome one-to-one comparison of like a tougher than normal morning and feeling okay instead of feeling that frustrating, I'm trying to find the words from your last session, difficult, no space, and so upset about the way things should be, right? To actually feeling okay. That's like huge. But I'm just wondering if we could sort of extrapolate of like, okay, it's been a few weeks since we met. Has there been any sense of okayness that's felt kind of new?
Well, I mean, I've had some moments, of just feeling deeply satisfied in the moment. But I mean, that has happened before. So, I mean, is it new? I mean, I don't know if the frequency is upticked. I don't have the deep logs of such matters. But hard to say. Maybe, I guess, is where I would land on that one.
I think last time we were really feeling into like that it felt like things don't get to be chill because there's so much should. Like either the shoulds coming from the outside and it feels like a lot of pressure, or the shoulds coming from the inside and it's so frustrating when things on the outside don't comply. But we were really feeling into like the should was so big before, and I'm just wondering, maybe things feel a little more chill now, a little less rigid.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think just in terms of the notion that we all make mistakes, that's sort of like obvious. Like I know this, but I guess I sort of feel and experience that a little more.
Wow. Tell me about a moment like that. I'm so curious.
Well, it was funny. I was just very amused. I don't know if it's about mistakes, but I was very amused. So my son, Johnny, was getting kind of frustrated last night. He really wanted pizza. I was like, we have no pizza-like items. I'm using my best creative skills. So, hey, choose. We got 5 other things you can eat. So, like, pick one. So he was just in a bad mood about it. So, like, and I think he was very tired. It was clearly time for bed. Like all the factors for kids. And I remember he said, and he's done this before, but I don't think I've picked up the thread before. He said, "Fine, I'm watching Curious George," which I thought was funny as a threat. Sort of like, that's not like forbidden in our home. I'm watching Curious George. But I thought it was funny. And I like really, and so I tried to laugh out loud because that could just really frustrate a kid even more. Like, your feelings are my amusement. But I thought that's funny. And in a way, it's like we had a podcast guest, Kwame Christian, talks about your inner toddler. And I think he's really onto something. I was like, that is not so different than from what we grown-up folk do in terms of, and as a threat, it didn't really make sense. But in another way, it made total sense. Like, my ability to inhibit my urges and impulses is just about depleted. So fine, I'm going to watch Curious George. Is like, fine, I'm going to do whatever the heck it is I want to do now. And so in grown-up world, that could be, fine, you know what? I'm going to eat this whole cheesecake. Fine, I'm going to binge watch Netflix or play video games or smoke or whatever your poison is. I think it was kind of telling in terms of like, yeah, like we are all human. We all have our limits, our cravings, our base desires, impulses. And sometimes we just reach our limit. And that is just the human experience. So I guess I was thinking about that in terms of when he said, fine, I'm watching Curious George. I thought it was really funny and nonsensical and yet extremely relatable at the same time.
Totally. That there's just desires and impulses. And the should part almost feels kind of silly knowing that there's an animal inside. Also knowing that the animal inside doesn't respond well to shoulds and is harmless, the animal inside. It's like, I'm going to watch Curious George. I'm going to do something I want, right? Like I think some of us have fears that the animal part will be like depraved, like some sort of maniacal, like dangerous part, that our desires and impulses are not safe. And that's why the should is so big. But actually, the should is what creates the resistance and like acting out. And the instincts and desires are actually just so natural. You don't see animals doing anything untoward. Everything's just in harmony in nature.
It all depends on how you define untoward. I'm thinking about monkeys and what they do at the zoo. That means you have to stand back. But I think I hear your larger point.
Yeah, when animals are captured and put in captivity against their will, there is a anger that's natural. And I think that's what we're talking about today, is that when instincts and impulses are held in and controlled, there's an anger that builds.
Yeah, and that's a meaty topic. And it's interesting in terms of that creates new questions for exploration around, well, in a world where we do have professional expectations and duties and responsibilities, et cetera, and we are also have an animal inside us, and shoulds are tricky, is like, what's the new self-management paradigm?
I think the new paradigm is that there's no management, but a trust that our instincts have allowed us to survive and thrive for billions of years, and that our instincts aren't bad, and that we've set up professional ethics in some parts because we aren't listening to our instincts, because our instincts are good and constructive and usually take care of everyone involved. But sometimes we think we can't trust our insides, and so we do some rigid rules outside. Last time you and I were talking about how the kind of fractal pattern that's been so prevalent is this thing about should, and that when the should's on the outside, there's really only felt like two ways to deal with it. Either obey it and be good, or disobey it and be kind of subverting, or become the man on top who dictates the shoulds.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as long as there's a should universe, there's really only three positions. And we were talking about last time how all three positions suck.
Yes, that I was a bit difficult in that being the guy on top is kind of awesome in some ways, but it also has its drawbacks. And so I hear you.
Well, what we were talking about last time is that the reason it's not awesome is it doesn't work. Like, nature can't be controlled. So there will always be blueberries in the lunch pail.
Oh, sure.
And there'll always be blockades in the sink. Nature can't be put in boxes. And so if there was a way to be the one who dictates the shoulds and that went smoothly, I would get behind that and be like, yeah, let's get you in that position. But shoulds always end up in frustration, whether we're the one giving the shoulds or receiving the shoulds, they always end up in frustration.
I hear you. Yeah. So what is to be done?
Well, what's cool is it sounds like these things are starting to already loosen their grip on you, because today in the kitchen,
Yeah.
when everything wasn't going the way it quote unquote should be going, that wasn't actually your experience. You didn't slap a should on it. You just went, yeah, the lights are off and things are how they are, and I'm okay. I'm okay. So it's like a totally different orientation to life where these rigid rules are no longer trying to control everything, either to be controlled by it or be controlling. That gets to sort of dissolve and resolve, and life gets to feel a lot more safe, like unconditionally safe, because there's nothing outside of the scope of what's okay. And life gets to feel a lot more in flow because there's no resistance and anger to when things are should or shouldn't. And life just gets to feel more easy, just easy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's already starting to happen. So the work is already working.
Yeah.
The one question I had though, so what we talked about today was for me to maybe start to explain the coping styles that were at play here. I don't know if you'd want that.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Yeah. Let's take a gander.
Yeah. So we all have several coping styles. I had all 12. And so each person's unique way that those 12 things marry together is what creates their unique song or experience in life. So what we were tracking within you is that there was this big should, and that should had relationships to several different coping styles. So let me explain what I mean. When the should was on the outside, there was this constricted coping style, which is when we really believe that there's right and wrong in life. And we really believe that the inner animal should be tamed and controlled because that the instincts are bad and controlling them is good. And so we keep ourselves in this really tight little box and we want to be good and not bad. So when the should is outside, like there really is a right and a wrong, we constrict ourselves. And part of the constricted for you was also a little bit symbiotic of like, well, if someone says that I shouldn't carry the thing this way because it'll get water on the floor, I have to just do what they say. And that would be good. When the shoulds are outside and I'm obeying them, then I can know I'm good. And so there's this sort of constricted symbiotic combo. And then the thing is, when we're controlled by a should, it's actually really enraging, obviously. I mean, it's like being in a military camp or something, and a military prison. And when we're controlled by the shoulds, eventually we feel very angry and we want to subvert or undermine the authority that's outside. And you and I were talking about that position, and that's called what I call the subverting subtype of the frustrated coping style, because it's so frustrating that we're not allowed to decide what I want. Or like your son was he wasn't frustrated. He got angry, but he wasn't frustrated. He expressed it. He's like, all right, well, if I can't get that, I'm going to go get this, right? He was direct with what he wanted, and he was going to make sure he got what he wanted. But when we're frustrated as little ones and we can't get what we want because we're being told, no, you have to do it this way, because that's shoulds and shouldn'ts, we start to learn how to kick under the table and be a little bit subverting and undermining and hold on to that anger, and it festers in into resentment. And so we're in this system where there's some guy on top. I think we called him the very tall, authoritative, finger wagging figure. This is who you saw in your unconscious.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, okay, so that guy's here. And it's like, I either can obey him and be constricted and symbiotic, or I can disobey him and be subverting, or I can be him and be omnipotent. That's another coping style. And omnipotent is when we try to control everything and we have a very low threshold for discomfort, which is actually the first line you brought up to me in the coding session.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's amazing because everyone's coping styles are so different from one another. And it's funny that like 3 or 4 sort of constellated around this idea of should. That's totally unique to you. I've never seen that patterning before in anyone.
Oh, hot dog.
Yeah. So like that's your special song or pain that you've had to live in, is this pattern of like, well, the should is inevitable. This very tall and authoritative finger wagging character is inevitable. So I can either obey him, disobey him, or be him. And so if we don't want to be omnipotent or subverting or constricted or symbiotic, we would want to know about what's natural, that there are no shoulds in life, that shoulds are a made up game that actually hurt everyone. And that's why we actually used the blueberry, believe it or not, as the portal last time to the new world, where it's like nature won't be put in a box. And when we try to, it creates a whole lot of trouble for us. So anything we try to repress or deny becomes kind of monstrous in the shadows and starts to wreak havoc in our lives. And so what we did last time we met was we sort of started to free you from that universe that's ruled by a very tall, authoritative, finger-wagging character. We just started to dissolve and resolve that symbol that was so baked into your, what I would call symbolic realm, or what some might call the quantum field. It was so baked into everything that it felt inevitable. I mean, these are my three options. But what we started to do was dissolve and resolve. Maybe he's not a thing anymore. Maybe that's guy's not around so much anymore. Maybe he's not running the show anymore. And that's why things sort of started to feel fine. Because that guy was actually the guy that was making things not feel fine, whether it was outside or inside. It just made things not feel fine.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's cool to explore another approach to the whole enchilada.
Yeah. And then there's one more piece that I feel like I only figured out after we hung up. And it made me feel a little badly, like there was something I wanted to repair with you and like check out with you, which was that there's another big coping style in here for you that we didn't really get that much time to address. And it's called the disconnected coping style. And it wasn't really a part of this finger wagging person. And so that's why we didn't spend much time on it. I did code into you to be connected at the end, but we didn't really address disconnected. Now, there's 4 subtypes of disconnected. And I think you have 2 of the 4, which I call masked and stiff. And the stiff part is a part that really likes logic and rationality and scripts and rules, not in that authoritative way, but like guidelines so that I know how to get from point A to point B. There's like a clear, rational, logical path to get there. And I started thinking, oh my gosh, as we're dissolving the authoritative finger wagging thing, I wonder if the stiff part's starting to feel like, how do I know how to navigate reality without those logical steps and rules? I have had a recent stiff person in my life say, I can't cook without a cookbook, like literally and metaphorically. I need the steps and the rules to feel safe. And so it's like we started dissolving and resolving that authoritarian rule thing that has felt so bad. But I wondered if that existential part that hasn't felt totally safe in this world might have felt like if we do that all the way, you might not know the best way to go through life if there aren't clear rules and strategies.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, that's accurate. I mean, I'm not like terrified, but it is a bit of a head scratcher. It's like, okay, well then now what?
Yeah, because if we have that coping style, everyone else's like emotionality and like spontaneity feels like actually chaos and kind of silly and kind of dangerous. Like, why would you be that uncontrolled and uncontained? And it feels like dangerous and kind of like a bad idea because it doesn't feel like any of that raw, spontaneous, emotional stuff could ever feel safe or feel like home or feel like a real connection or feel like understood. Because this place has felt like the place that's felt a little bit alien, this earth place. And it's felt easier to navigate it with a set of rules. It's called the disconnected coping style, and it happens when we're newborns, actually, when for whatever reason our parents aren't able to attune to us. They just can't kind of understand us. And so we end up feeling like this world is the place that isn't a fit. It's like feeling kind of like an outsider or having an observation window into life, but not being fully here. And disconnected is one of my core wounds, but I'm the masked subtype, which I think you have too. But it's that part that can be so dang relational and sing-songy and know exactly how to say the right thing at the right time. It's the radio host part of you. And it's the part of me that's so damn good on radio shows, right? But the cool thing about coming out of disconnected is that we can start to thaw out and feel that it's actually safe to feel our feelings and to share them with others, and that we actually will be heard and understood and believed in a way that's gentle and safe. and not overwhelming or too much. We don't actually need a rule book for life. But the rule book has felt so safe. It's really hard to let go of. But I think, holding on to the rule book is okay, but sort of slowly taking the risk to dip our toes in the waters of, what if I try something outside the box right now, just because I'm feeling like it, and see if it's okay. And it's like the more we try little by little to do the things that aren't necessarily mapped out in the rule book, the more we experientially discover that it is safe to connect and be more loose and less attached to the rules.
Sounds nice.
How are you feeling in your body right now as you feel into that?
I don't know. I'm thirsty. I don't.
Do you want to get some water?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, let's have a sip together. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so beautiful that that's what just happened there, because that's like the antidote to disconnected. Because disconnected were so many misattunements. Like, I need water, but instead I'm getting a sweater put on me. Like, it's like, and so it's like, you were like, I'm thirsty. And it's like, oh my God, let's drink. And that's that attunement that leads to a sense of safety in connection, that your inside experience of needing water could be heard and met by the outside. That's like, oh yeah, I believe you. Let's have water. Makes sense that you're thirsty. And that's how connection starts to happen. Because when we're disconnected, our inner world and our outer world, there's such a big split, like a wall. And so just you sharing that you're thirsty was like so connective. Like, I was like, oh, I got to feel his fleshy, alive part that wants water. And we got to have a sip of water together.
Well, Dr. Sam, I'm eager to please, I guess. If that does it for you, happy to serve.
Pete, I'm just so honored that you've been willing to go on this wild ride with me. I know that what I do is really outside the box for literally every human right now, because it's a brand new approach. But I think especially doing it on air, and especially doing it when there's a history of things, rules feeling safe. And so what I'm doing is so far outside of any rules or convention. And so I feel so touched and moved by your courage and your playfulness and your willingness to push the boundaries of your reality and what you're bringing to your audience. It's just so, so cool.
Oh, thank you. Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you really taking a lot of extra time and being thorough and digging in and your passion and heart for this stuff. It's beautiful and powerful. And it seems like you're onto some things. And I don't quite totally understand it, but it seems like it's doing something. So I want to do some more of it. And that's where I stand.
Pete, it would be a delight to do more with you, either on air or off air. It would be a delight.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. All right. Well, if you are still sticking with us, that is awesome. A mega long episode. And if you're sorting through things, wondering maybe, is all this for real? Well, that's for you to judge and assess. I would say personally, I think it made more of an impact for me than my average therapy session, thinking about things historically. And then I scientifically begin to wonder, is that placebo? Am I interpreting ambiguous circumstances in my favor because I want it to be true? After all, novel, easy solutions have a certain appeal that make us all just kind of want them to be true. And I suppose we'll see. But I am encouraged by what I have experienced thus far and have, in fact, parted with real money to schedule another coding session. My take here is that Dr. Sam seems to be onto something. And, my own experience and those of others, anecdotes, pointing to genuine personal transformative stuff going down from practices like affirmations, cold plunges, prayer, exercise, hypnosis, mindfulness, meditation. All these sorts of things outside the realms of typical, hey, let's figure out what's up, what's going on, and doing some thinking and some fixing it. So whether the mechanism at work here is the fractal nature of the universe or whatnot, or some source code quantum something or another, or there's some biochemical neuroscience-y explanations or principles at work, I mean, hey, I have no idea, but I am curious to explore it some more. And I thank you for exploring something totally different with me on this episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job. Would love to hear your take since we did something totally different. P@awesomeatyourjob.com. Shoot me a quick note. I'd appreciate it. And I hope to catch you next time. And peace.
Thanks for listening. To get the most out of the show, we recommend 2 key things. First, check out the extra resources at awesomeatyourjob.com. You can find this episode's transcript and links, as well as the perfect episode for your situation. You can search the full-text transcripts of hundreds of episodes or explore episodes tagged by topic and competency covered. Second, subscribe to the podcast and get future episodes automatically. You can subscribe by telling Siri and several other smartphones and speakers, subscribe to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, or by tapping subscribe in your podcast player of choice. If you'd like some extra help figuring out podcasts and how subscriptions work, visit awesomeatyourjob.com/subscribe for guidance. Hope to catch you on the next episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job.